everyone, my name's Amanda and I'm here to talk to you about the process that I went through for our Module 3 Lipids and Their Qualities experiment. And I would like to walk you through the process that I went through when we were experimenting with the different oils this week. So let's get started and I'll walk you through my process. So I first started with making the oil blends, and we had 4 different oil blends. We had almond oil with beeswax, almond oil with cocoa butter, grapeseed oil with beeswax, and grapeseed oil with cocoa butter. So to prepare the blends, I created a very technical double boiler there, as you can see. And I'm just kidding, it's very simple. Just a pot with water in it where you put a glass measuring cup inside, submerged in the boiling water, and then you place the oils and the beeswax into the glass measuring cup, and you just continue to stir with a metal spoon until everything is dissolved and liquefied. So in the middle picture there, you can see the almond oil with the beeswax just beginning to melt at the beginning. And then all the way to your right, you can see how after the grapeseed oil and beeswax blend was finished and I was pouring it onto the spoon, you can see the cooler part of the glass measuring cup. The oil blend actually, I guess you can say, froze or cooled off that quickly. It was kind of interesting. So the grapeseed oil and beeswax, as well as the almond oil and beeswax blends, they cooled to a solid. And for each blend, including the cocoa butter and almond and grapeseed oil blends, I used the same technique as you see here with the double boiler. I put the cocoa butter wafers is what I had to use, and I put that in the glass measuring cup and allowed it to melt, and the cocoa butter wafers took, I don't know, not even a minute to melt down. It was very quick, significantly quicker than the beeswax took to melt down. And as you can see here in this photo, you can see all the different oil blends that I prepared. And the almond oil, cocoa butter, the grapeseed oil, cocoa butter blends, they were liquid at room temperature as they cooled, and they stayed liquid forever. They're still liquid now, a few days later. And the beeswax blends were solid completely. The almond oil and beeswax blend was softer and easier to use and apply to the skin, as we'll see in a minute, where the grapeseed oil was a little bit harder to apply to the skin. So that was just some observations I made with those, and we'll see there's 10 different oils that we use to apply to the skin to see what we observed, and I'll show you now. So here on all the way to the left in the left photo, you can see kind of a mess of all of the different ingredients and oils that I was using, and all the way on the right you can see a list of each of the specific oils that were used on my very nice skin volunteer here. It was wonderful. So that middle picture there with the quadrants is the picture taken right after I first applied all of the different oils in each of the quadrants. And I apologize for the quality of the pictures. It was really, really difficult to figure out how to get a good picture so that you could really see what I'm talking about here. But the almond oil and the grapeseed oil, which are on the top 1 and 2 quadrants there, they were very wet. It seemed like the skin just could not grab onto those oils when I applied it. It definitely needed significant rubbing, and it did stay oily, and you can see how shiny it is up there. For the shea butter, that was pretty difficult to apply to the skin. You can see kind of the chunks there, and but however, it did soak into the skin. It was absorbed by the skin pretty readily, and right around 5 minutes, the oil and not the chunks were mostly absorbed into the skin, but it still felt oily to the touch. As for the cocoa butter in quadrant 4, the cocoa butter melted on contact with the skin, and it left the skin very oily. It was probably one of the most oily of them all, except for the blends, which we'll talk about in a second. So for the single oils, the cocoa butter was definitely the oiliest. One of the most interesting oils out of the whole experiment was the jojoba oil, which is in quadrant 5, and that oil, it applied very wet, and it did seem to soak into the skin the quickest out of all of the oils, and like in about 3 minutes it was pretty much absorbed completely, even without rubbing. But this one seemed to be kind of dry to me in a way. It kind of reminded me of witch hazel in a sense, because it was liquid and it applied very wet, but it was absorbed and cooling, evaporating relatively quickly. Even though it did absorb the quickest without rubbing, rubbing was definitely helpful in the absorption rate overall. And as for the blends, which you can see in quadrant 6, 7, 8, and 9, the blends with the cocoa butter were the oiliest and were the wettest by the end of the 10-15 minutes. They still looked like I just applied it, and it needed significant rubbing, but it still left the skin pretty greasy overall. And in quadrant 10, you can see that I used a lavender body lotion, Everyday Shea brand, and I just applied it without rubbing. In that picture you can see, and it absorbed pretty well. Rubbing was definitely easier, and when I rubbed in the lotion, it didn't leave the skin oily or greasy or anything like that. And we'll move on to some other pictures. Here's like another picture that I tried to get some reflection from the ceiling lights, but it's still kind of hard to see. But you can kind of see in 7 and 9, quadrant 7 and 9, how wet it is compared to the other quadrants, and also quadrant 4, which is the cocoa butter, which remained pretty oily. But 4, 7, and 9 all had cocoa butter within them. And you can see a little bit how quadrants 1 and 2 were still kind of wet. This is around 5-8 minutes, this picture, and you can see 1 and 2 where it's kind of absorbed but still a little oily, kind of in droplets there at the top. And the shea butter, the parts that aren't chunks of shea butter in quadrant 3, you can see how it was absorbed by the skin but kind of gave you a protective soft coating. And then in quadrant 8, which we haven't really talked about yet, was the grapeseed oil and beeswax blend, and that was barely wet at all. So it was a little difficult to apply to the skin, but it seemed to absorb almost immediately in the skin, and here you can't even see any kind of reflection there in quadrant 8. And here's another angle. Again, you can see quadrants 7 and 9 are pretty wet still, and oily. Also quadrant 4. And let me see, in quadrant 6 was the almond oil with beeswax. And that one, it applied really well. It was very soft. It left the skin feeling very soft and protected. That one was my Skin Volunteer's favorite blend. And so that was the end of my experiment, and I wanted to leave you all with some little laughter, a little chemistry laughter. So I hope some of you out there can appreciate these lipid cartoons. And I hope that was helpful and you got an idea of this process and a little bit of an idea of what kinds of lipids that you may or may not want to include in your skincare products. And I wish you all well. Thank you very much.